Welcome back. My name is David Whitmore. The other voice you will hear is Joseph Whitmore. This is a podcast about Eleanor of Aquitaine. And just a couple of disclaimers up front. We're not historians, nor are we comedians, which will become evident. And this conversation is unrehearsed, as usual. I never pointed that out, but obviously we're not like reading from a script. Like I read and then you read. But you know what? We might want to try that one time. It's like I'll read, blah 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 blah. Okay, here's where I make a joke. No, this is unrehearsed.
That's why I think we're sort of like the liberal version of Trump. It's like we just say whatever's on top of our mind, totally unfiltered.
And
On
this,
the other hand, I think we actually do some prep work, right? So whatever we're going to talk on the week before, we'll either listen to some lectures, read Wikipedia. I've been reading a book on Eleanor. Didn't get through it, but I read about halfway through it. So we do come with some preparation, but then after that, it's all ad lib, right?
well, I try to not to learn too much about it. I don't want to get lost in the details, and I just want to mention that we are not sponsored by Gatorade yet.
Yeah.
All right. So Eleanor of
But
Aquitaine.
if they don't sponsor it, it's the last time you're going to see their bottle.
Right. Next week it'll be Pepsi. So a couple things to get started. Eleanor of Aquitaine, she was born in 1122 and she died in 1204. So she lived to be a pretty good age considering she probably had a lot of enemies. But people always, the people that do, well, first of all, a lot of people haven't maybe heard of her, but they've heard of her sons, who we'll talk about in the next episode. Richard the Lionheart, and there's all of her sons were crazy. But the couple things is that she got married twice. Once she became the Queen of France, and the second that was to Louis VII, and the second
That's correct, yeah.
was to Henry II of England. But a couple things, if we can just take a step back, France wasn't France. France was like a little area around Paris. Aquitaine was where the action was, really. It was southwestern France. And I want to go back a little bit to her grandfather because as cool as Eleanor is, as cool as Richard Lionheart is, her grandfather, William the Ninth, he put the color into the Dark Ages. They don't even call it the Dark Ages anymore because of him. This guy was the color. He was the first troubadour, so he was like a poet, and he would like tell stories and sing songs, and some of his songs they still know about, although they lost the how it's supposed to go, but they have the words in the poet. And yeah, sure, he was in the first Crusade, and he was a real king and all that. He really wasn't into that whole fighting thing. He was into partying. And Aquitaine area where they lived, there was like people were coming and going, and there were scholars. And Eleanor, as a little girl, she knew her grandfather. So probably by the time she was 6 or 7 or something, he had died. But she had an idea in her head how a court is supposed to be, and it wasn't like anything.
They had all the mass, all the intellectuals, all the artists, and even her father, William the Tenth, was they were all characters. He got excommunicated. Her father,
Right.
William the Tenth, got excommunicated, and then he go, "Well, I don't want to be excommunicated," so he went and found his own pope.
Yeah.
He created his own pope that unexcommunicated him. That problem was solved. So I think Eleanor grew up in this environment. Oh, and when he got excommunicated, like he threw the bishop out of the church. He got defenestrated. That was like the first defenestration. And then he went out, stormed out, and found his own pope and said, "You're pope, and you're going to give me an indulgence." So she was raised in that sort of over the top. I figure I think her father and at least her grandfather was like the Rolling Stones of the Dark Ages, right? Her grandfather was the Mick Jagger.
Yeah, the
Of
other thing is they
of the Dark Ages, and her father was like the son of Mick Jagger, who's like totally over the top, and then here's little Eleanor, and she had a little sister who was a character too. So
well, I just
think
want to
she
say
could go
what
far.
I was just going to say one thing about her grandfather though, because you mentioned that her father was just like whatever, I'll find a new pope. Her grandfather didn't have any hang-ups about going against the church either, right? He
Yeah,
was completely like, whatever, you want me to do that? And I don't think so. Slam back some beer, right? Because wasn't there something where he wanted to get divorced, the grandfather, and they were like, no, and he's like, well, I did. They were just like not following the rules from the get-go.
yeah, yeah,
And they had the
yeah. Like
badass
those,
land. They had the
yeah. Oh yeah, they
southwestern
had
of
more. They actually
France.
had more land, ruled more land than Henry. I mean Louis. What was that? Louis the Sixth. Who was called the Fat, right? Louis the Fat was what a character. So yeah, he had this little land around Paris, but then there was the Aquitaine, and then up north there was the Normans who didn't give a shit about what the French king was doing because they had England, right? There was the Normans up in England, and it's funny even after the Normans conquered England, they spent most of their time on the continent. England was too cold and wet. We'll be the king, but we're gonna stay down in. And then when Eleanor ended up marrying Henry II, they combined Aquitaine, Normandy, and England. So that was
Yeah.
like 3/4 of France, and little Louis is going, "Well, I'm still king." They go, keep telling yourself that, Louis.
All right, but let's get back to
Okay.
her. Okay, so now Eleanor is a teenager. I mean, I guess we could say something about her father. Her father dies um, on a pilgrimage. Convenient,
Yeah,
goes
yeah.
right to heaven.
Yeah, yeah. He's gonna go on a pilgrimage, and but the funny thing, so Eleanor is like what 12, and he leaves his Eleanor in the care of Raymond, who's like her uncle, and he's like 15.
Yeah,
So Raymond and Eleanor hanging out in Aquitaine, and there is some shenanigans going on even at that point.
right. We'll talk more about that in a minute.
Yeah,
Okay,
Raymond shows up again later. Yeah.
right. So, anyway, Eleanor marries Louis the 7th, and she's quite young. And
Yeah,
the
13, 14, yeah.
so
He's only like 16.
that's right. And he was he was on the bench, okay? He was not planning to be king of anything. He was planning to be a monk.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
He,
but
he
any
reminds me. He reminds me of Alphared the Unready. Remember him?
right, right.
Well, he's actually in the future to these people. No. He's in the past. Yeah, Ethelred. He's the one who wanted to be a pope because I mean he wanted to be a monk because he had like 16 brothers ahead of him, and they
Right.
all died, and he ended up being king. So it's the same thing with this poor Louis.
So anyway, Louis, his brother dies. That was going to be king. He becomes king, but he's not. I have a whole theory on him that will start to emerge here in a second. He's a good guy, but you know what? Some guys don't like women. I mean, they like women. They love to hang out with them. They're their best friend. They go shopping with them. But I think he might have been gay. But anyway, and Eleanor is like the
Yeah, because they
opposite.
actually know his son was gay openly. His son, Louis the Sixth's son, had an affair with Richard the Lionhearted,
Yeah,
which is a little side thing of history. So
that's
it's
it.
highly likely
It might be likely,
that
but they were not well matched. She comes from this colorful court, and he was going to be in the monastery. So right off the bat, but that doesn't matter really because they had stuff to do. There was stuff going on, and they had to come to the rescue of. I guess this is quite some time now, but they had to come to the rescue of her uncle. And that's how the Second Crusade really started, right? Because something had fell.
Well, I gotta say something about a little background too. So they got married. So her father died, and then she asked to be taken up to Paris to get married to Louis VI. But then right after she's married to Louis VI, Louis V, the Fat, dies. So they lose both parents, and all of a sudden they're king and queen of friggin' Aquitaine and all of France, and they're only like 15 and 16 for God's sake. And this guy just was thinking he was going to spend his whole friggin' life in a monastery, and now he's married to this girl she's the daughter of Mick Jagger. And it's like she's going, we're like king and queen, let's party. And he's going, well, no, I'm gonna go put on a haircoat and sleep in the church until we can have intercourse on specified days of the week.
Yeah, they didn't have a lot of luck conceiving. But you know what? They, in a way, as kids, they weren't kids back then at that age. But they were as big as the moment needed to be, right? They didn't, when the important things happen and you can be, bigger than that moment, that's all that matters. And they did step up. They made a bunch of mistakes, but we can go over them.
True. I didn't think about that. I always thought Lewis was sort of a goofus, like with this over-religious, zealous, guy who's not up with the times. But
well, sure he was, but he had advisors.
Considering he was totally unprepared for what they put him into.
All right, so
being married to someone like Eleanor, a super extrovert,
right.
Super party girl, and you're like a friggin' little nerd who just wants to stay in the church and read Aristotle.
Right. So they're getting ready for a crusade. It's like so many goofy things just all in a row. So they're going to travel to the Holy Lands from France. They're gonna also this German king is going to
Conrad.
meet. Conrad's going to go as well.
Conrad II, right? And he's not that much older than they are.
But
right?
the thing is
well, everybody up early back then, but these three kids are going to go to the Holy Land.
Right.
It's
but at least they could have gone together, right? But no. So they're going to go fight a crusade, and Conrad's like, I'm here. They haven't fucking left yet. They're waiting for the Pope to come and bless them first. And then they got to travel from France all the way to the Holy Land. Conrad already got a bunch of his troops wiped out, crossing this mountainous area. I don't know why he went that way. So he already went through hell. They were just probably getting ready to go.
Yeah.
And
One thing, Conrad's big mistake, the first big mistake was he camped his troops, 50,000 troops, in the middle of a floodplain.
Yes. Right.
And then it rained. I mean, poor guy. Can you imagine that? That would be such an awful. You're prepared to die for. What if you still get to go to heaven if you just die because you camped in the floodplain, or God goes, nah, you're not a martyr.
I wonder if there's another
camp.
question there, and I guess it depends on the army and the time and who is paying for it. But if the troops don't get paid, if they're dead, then the leader would be more inclined to go ahead and sacrifice them. But the truth of that is not so clear because they often would have to take care of the families and stuff. So I don't know. But anyway, the whole thing, because later, in the 1500s, there were so many armies that were completely mercenaries. They didn't have any loyalty. The first time that they missed a day's wages, the Swiss would they'd be like, "Look, I got to go," and then they would just leave, and they'd be like, "Well, you didn't pay me." But anyway, that's a whole other thing. But anyway, so Eleanor makes
that was in Italy mostly. They had all the mercenaries who didn't want to fight because it's going to ruin their army, right?
Yeah, but this one, I think if you look at it, if you look at the years, I don't know if you call it the high Middle Ages, the low, or whatever, but it's been more than 5 centuries since the Roman, collapse.
The Western Roman,
and the armies are still not up to where the Romans were. You know what I mean? Like the Romans could put together 50,000 troops. These guys can't. Yeah, this is 500 years later, and they're like, anyway. Again, I'm off the track. But what I wanted to say about Eleanor is, first of all, she's going on the crusade to begin with. And the reason she's going is because she controls like 20,000 elite troops or something. A lot of people. And she's
bored.
Well, she's bored too. Right. That's right. But she's like, I'm not going to give my troops to somebody else. I'm going. Which was fine. I could see that. But what I can't see is her bringing all of her ladies in waiting with her and a baggage train for all their clothes.
A mile long, right?
Yeah, so really, was she going to fight a crusade, or was she going to go party with her uncle?
She was going to go party with her uncle. It was a party for her, yeah. She was going to go hang out in Byzantium and then go hang out in Antioch. I'm sure she felt. I don't think she took the crusade all that seriously. I don't think, because it's not like they were taking back the whole Holy Land like the First Crusade did. The First Crusade, had to fight everybody. Now, the Crusaders have only lost one city, Odessa, right?
Odessa.
And like, we're going to go back and take one city back, right? We have 100,000 troops between us and Otto. No big deal. This is going to be a picnic. And I think she's kind of, there was going to be a battle at the end, but she didn't think it was going to be a serious battle. She didn't realize that these were not the same Muslims that their fathers were fighting. These guys are pissed off and they're united, as opposed to before where they were unpissed off and ununited, right? So it's a different story. So they were not up on their intelligence gathering, I don't think.
Christendom always seemed like they underrated their Muslim counterparts time and time again for centuries. That may be why Constantinople is called Istanbul today. So they, after the baggage, and they have to cross those same mountains that Conrad had trouble with, and they lose a lot of men, but they finally get to where Raymond is. And Raymond is in what city again? It's not Odessa. It's Antioch. So
yeah. Well, first they get to Constantinople, which is the big city,
right?
With the Byzantine emperors, which the Byzantium at that time still thought they were the Roman Empire.
For sure they did.
They didn't.
They called themselves Roman.
They didn't call themselves Byzantiums. That didn't come until like 1800s. But they stayed there for a while, and even the Byzantium historians were writing about Eleanor. What a party girl she was. They called her and her troop a bunch of Amazons, and they called her Goldfoot because of her gold slippers, I guess. So they were having a lot of fun with her. And they go, this is the kind of crusaders we like. If they had crusaders like this from the beginning, we wouldn't have so much problem. We would have kept them longer. But then she left Constantinople and traveled. So then they had to leave Constantinople, and they were going through the mountains, like you said, and they go, this is not working out for me, Eleanor said. So she gets on a ship along with all the nobles and takes the easy way, luxury. She sails to Antioch, and she leaves all the foot soldiers stuck on the mountain, and they have to walk. They have to walk all their way to Antioch through these mountains, getting hassled and by the Muslims and whoever, the brigands, and so they lost like a third of their troops before they ever got to Antioch. But by that time,
And that was bad press that she was never able to unload that baggage, because after that, you know what, the troops were probably like, you know what, this is kind of silly, but it's all right. Um, Everything is going to work out okay. And then she leaves, and then they got to take the baggage through the mountains. And then at that point, the troops turn on her. Right? Basically, they're like, "Screw this already." In the back of their mind, they're like, "This is not going to work."
This is not working. Yeah, once when they were going through the mountains, Eleanor was in the front with their ladies. She was leading the back because I guess she wanted to be the leader. She was a pretty a controlling type personality. And then they had the baggage, all this miles of baggage of dresses and shoes and stuff in the middle. And then Louis at the end with his troops at the end, right? And then since they were on a mountain path, the Muslims attacked from above, and they were like attacking all their provisions and the cliff. And so Louis actually comes up with his troops to try to save Eleanor's clothes and her shoes. and they throw him over the cliff. He gets thrown over the cliff, and he saves himself by holding on to this tree limb, and pulls himself up, scrambles back to his troops, and he says, "I'm turning this whole thing over to the Templars."
That's
who are
right.
Like these knights,
the professionals.
The professional. He goes, "You guys do it. I'm done. I'm not going to risk my life anymore trying to save Eleanor's baggage train."
So.
Oh, anyways, go on. I thought that was a good, funny story.
Yeah, that's entertaining. When they are in Antioch, Eleanor begins to have too good of time. Her and her uncle, her childhood friend, begin like talking in the corners, very private conversations, spending a lot of time with each other. And
remember, and Eleanor doesn't speak French.
That's right. Eleanor speaks Latin and Poetov. What is it called?
Provençal or Aquitaine is what they called it back then. Aquitaine.
Yeah, and she spoke.
It's like Provençal they still speak in southern France.
Oh, that's cool. But so they were speaking their childhood language together.
So poor Louis can't even understand what they're talking about.
Right. But you know what the thing is, I don't think Louis. I'm still going with this. I think that Louis was like
Louis, huh?
You know what? I like him. But I don't think he had any trouble. He probably didn't even care, except for the embarrassment, if Eleanor was having sex with her uncle or not. And we don't know. Nobody knows. But what was used against her by the army that by now wanted to do everything they could to get rid of her. They built up those stories, this, that, and the other. And this is where I get confused. You'll have to... I know she gets kidnapped. They go to the Pope for marriage counseling. But she ends up imprisoned for 16 years. How does that happen? Is that true? I read that 16 years.
Yeah, but she is imprisoned by Henry II. That's later.
Oh. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
But she was in prison here
that's
for a little
later.
while. They took her captive, and they went to the Pope for marriage counseling.
Oh yeah. They did. Did the Pope put him in bed and watched him until they mated, so to make sure?
Well, he
And
tucked
they
him
did
in
the
and
same
stuff.
thing. Yeah, the Pope did the same thing with Richard the Lionhearted. Him and his bishops caught him. They dragged him to church and did a conversion therapy on him.
Well, the church was
That's
really
for next time.
the church was really into people's sexual lives. We got to go back a little bit because they had this crazy rule that everybody ignored because it was impossible to follow. It said you couldn't, and incest was about real estate law. Because it was like you couldn't, and they had this seventh cousin. You couldn't marry a seventh cousin, which is crazy because you can't even figure out who your third cousin is. So nobody paid attention to that. But clearly, this was her real uncle. So
but she wasn't married to him, so it was okay.
Yeah, it was so weird. They had so many. They were not alarmed by the morals. They were. There was different things that concerned them. It was kind of weird. But anyway, that was the end of the crusade for Eleanor, because after Antioch, they capture her and put her in a boat, right, and take her to the Pope.
Yeah, right. So what happens after which they lost? So they're in Antioch and they're supposed to get Edessa back, right? That was the whole purpose of the crusade, was to get Edessa from the Mormon, from the Mormon. Yeah.
From the Mormons. Damn Mormons! It was almost called Salt Lake City, that place.
But for some reason they never do, and Louis wants to go to Jerusalem, which is still in Christian hands at that time. There's no reason for him to go there, right? And he says, well, and Eleanor goes, well, no, I'm not going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to stay here in Antioch with Raymond.
Party!
He goes, the hell you are. You're not going to stay in Antioch with Raymond, for God's sake. And so he does. He kidnaps her and drags her down to Jerusalem. And he's staying with his relatives in Jerusalem instead of her relatives in Antioch. And he said, and they're down there, and he's going, well, we didn't get Edessa back. Why don't we attack Damascus, which was on nobody's agenda, right? Nobody. It was nobody's plan. And so they go, but we're here. We got to do something. And so they attack Damascus and lose. And they lost more troops. And then Louis drags Eleanor to the Vatican, and that's where they have their marriage counselor, and the Pope puts them in bed with the Pope's seal on their covers, and I guess
it worked because she did conceive a girl.
That's the only way. The Pope actually had to supervise the whole thing to make sure Louis got it up. Maybe he liked it because the Pope was watching. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. She conceived, but she didn't have a son, and so that was problematic. And I think
that's one of the reasons they said they had to wait long enough to make sure she wasn't pregnant by Raymond, right? So that's why he had to drag her down to Jerusalem, give her like some months, and then says, okay, she's not pregnant by Raymond. Let's go. I'll go and pregnant her under the supervision of the Pope.
Yeah, see, this is why
they had another daughter.
This is why Louis VII, I think, is gay, because holy shit, if you had to take your wife somewhere away from her uncle to find out if she was. That would be the end of the marriage. I don't care who she was, but not with Louis. He's like, I think it'll be fine. The Pope will watch us. Yeah, so I think this is probably where Eleanor.
And actually, it was Eleanor who was asking for a divorce this whole time.
Right.
And her argument for the divorce was saying, well,
we're related.
Cousins in like the third degree or something.
That's right.
Like, wait. Even though she's like screwing her uncle.
Yeah, she's all the marriage between Louis VII and Eleanor was not legal because they were fourth cousins. But it turns out that her second husband, Henry II, is also her second cousin. So she
Which was
really,
okay because she had male heirs.
That's right. But the people that we know that she slept with, she was all related to all of them. But anyway, I think that the big important things of the first half of Eleanor here is that France you think that France is going to become united, but it doesn't yet, because it doesn't happen until they have a male heir, which she doesn't have. So instead of that happening, she ends up marrying Henry. And I guess we can take it up
Yeah,
next time
and she
with
takes
that.
Aquitaine back. She takes Aquitaine back after she leaves Henry. So yeah, I mean Louis. So Louis has lost Aquitaine, and can I just say one little thing about her little sister? Her
Yeah.
little sister was like younger than her by a couple years, which means she was like 13, and she went off and married uh, the Count of Champagne, who was actually already married too. So that was the big war. Like, and so Eleanor was married to Louis by then. He says, "Well, you have to help my little sister because the Champagnians are, fighting my little sister and her new husband," and he did. And in one of the battles, like 1,000 people got burnt to death in a church.
Ay,
And
ay, ay.
Louis the Sixth came to rescue him, but he was too late, and so he turned up at the church right where they were being burned uh, to death, and he heard them screaming, and that's one of the things he never forgave himself for. Even though it wasn't his fault, it was Eleanor and her sister who caused the conflict. But he was always looking to get right with God on that, and he needed to go to Jerusalem. So maybe he had his heart in the right place, but
But
I don't
anyway,
know.
later, it seems like things are not going good for France. France is more like a little province there on the continent. But we'll see over the next centuries, they get all that land back and more. So,
Yeah, the 100 Years' War, and which ends up with our other lady, Joan of Arc. Right?
that's right.
She's the one. So you could put it. These are like bookends. Eleanor's the one who divided it, and Joan is the one who put it back together.
That's so
There
true.
you go.
You know what? I think our podcast should just be about women. That's all. It's like the women history podcast. Because a lot of
Yeah,
times they
because
were
it makes
married
our
to
men
cool
look like a
people.
bunch of doofuses. Like they got all these Louis. But Henry the Second's a character. We'll take up next time with him and Eleanor
All right,
and
don't
Richard
forget to tune in
and
next
John.
time for part 2 of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Thank you.
Okie dokie.
Oh,
Good.